A loud knock at the door shattered the neighbors' uneasy silence. It wasn't the first time social workers appeared at the small apartment in Block D in the suburbs of Newark, New Jersey. The neighborhood had grown accustomed to such reality's muffled cries, barefoot children running through dirty hallways, and occasionally the unmistakable sound of heated arguments from apartment 304. Inside, Jamal, a 15-year-old, tall for his age, with ever-watchful eyes and shoulders weighed down by burdens known his age should bear, watched his mother argue with a woman in a beige coat. Latasha, at 35, looked twice her age, worn down by an addiction that had stolen her smile years before. Their words overlapped, but the outcome was clear. Jamal could no longer stay there. Latasha had 9 mouths to feed, yet barely enough energy to care for herself. Jamal's father? He was nothing but a shadow, imprisoned in another city, lost to drugs since Jamal had learned to walk. Despite the chaos, Jamal didn't feel anger, not entirely. What he truly hated was the helplessness of knowing that, no matter how hard he tried, fate seemed determined to corner him at every turn. After weeks in a temporary shelter, Jamal was informed that a couple was interested in adopting him. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that, but previous attempts had ended in disappointment. Families who appeared often found that adopting a black teenager was more complex than they were willing to handle. Jamal had grown used to the idea that no one wanted a boy like him. Then, on a cold January afternoon, the couple arrived. Pastor Thomas Carter and his wife, Margaret, had a luminous presence. Thomas, a tall, well-dressed man, wore a cross around his neck as a symbol of his faith. Margaret, with her blonde hair tied in a bun, radiated a serene kindness. The two, who led a Baptist church in a small town in rural New Jersey, already had 2 children, Ethan and Claire, both 16, nearly the same age as Jamal. "Jamal," Margaret said with a gentle smile, "we'd love to get to know you better." Crossing his arms, and with a distrustful glare, Jamal responded with stubborn silence. It wasn't disinterest, it was fear. Fear of believing, of clinging to the idea of family, only to have his heart broken once again. Still, something about their warm demeanor, and perhaps the promise of finally leaving behind the cramped apartment, the shouting, and the feeling of abandonment convinced him to give it a try. Arriving at the Carter's house felt like stepping into another universe. The home, located in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees, was spacious, with pristine white walls and the constant smell of freshly baked cake. To Jamal, everything felt surreal, almost as if he didn't belong there. At first, things were difficult. Ethan and Claire, though polite, kept a respectful distance. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was clear they didn't know how to handle Jamal's presence. He didn't make things any easier. At school, the social differences between Jamal and his peers became even more apparent. He came from a place where survival was the priority. Here, everyone seemed to live without major concerns. Thomas tried to use faith as a bridge between them. He invited Jamal to church services and community activities. "You're worth more than you think, Jamal," the pastor said patiently. But even hearing those words, Jamal struggled to fully believe them. The first major conflict came just weeks later. At school, Ethan and Claire had many friends, something Jamal was still trying to achieve. One day, at a party organized by a classmate, Jamal was ridiculed for being the adopted kid and for being the only black student in the group. The outburst was inevitable. Jamal got into a fight with 3 other boys. When Margaret was called to the school, the look of disappointment on her face felt like a punch to the gut. "I knew I shouldn't have come here," Jamal shouted at home, locking himself in his room. It was Margaret who knocked on his door later, speaking calmly. "We're not giving up on you, Jamal. Never. I know you feel different, but you're part of this family now." Over time, small acts of kindness began to change things. Ethan, who was athletic and played basketball, noticed Jamal had incredible skills on the court. Despite initial reluctance, they started playing together, and what began as a competition turned into a bond. Claire, on the other hand, helped Jamal with his studies, particularly in literature. During these sessions, she revealed a sensitive and kind side that Jamal hadn't expected. Slowly, He began to see that the family wasn't trying to change who he was, but rather helping him feel part of something bigger. One afternoon, while he and Thomas were painting a backyard fence, the pastor looked at him and said something Jamal would never forget. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Jamal. What you've been through doesn't define who you are. What you do from here on out does." With time, Jamal's relationship with the Carters began to solidify. Despite their differences, Jamal was learning that, in this home, there was something he had never had before: stability. But that didn't mean everything was perfect. Thomas and Margaret were deeply dedicated to their work in the church, and although they tried to balance their attention among their children, their pastoral commitments often left Jamal feeling like an afterthought. He couldn't help but compare the fervor with which the couple cared for their congregation to the emotional distance that sometimes seemed to form between them and him. At school, things were far from simple. Jamal faced daily challenges as a young black man in a predominantly white, upper-middle-class environment. The judgmental glances, veiled comments, and even the compliments laced with condescension made him constantly question if he would ever truly be accepted. Despite this, some changes began to emerge. Ethan, the older brother, started to take on a more protective role toward Jamal. After the incident at the party, Ethan confronted some of the classmates who had provoked his adopted brother, making it clear that he wouldn't tolerate such behavior anymore. "He's my brother, like it or not," Ethan declared during a basketball practice in front of the whole team. This unexpected gesture opened a path of respect between the two. On the other hand, Claire showed a special sensitivity to understanding Jamal. She could see that he carried deep wounds, but instead of pressuring him, she simply listened. During a conversation in her room while they studied together, Claire asked something no one else had dared to. "Do you miss your mom?" Jamal hesitated before responding, but the sincerity in her eyes disarmed him. "I don't know. Sometimes, but not the way she was in the end." Just the idea of what she could have been. The conversation was a turning point for Jamal. For the first time, he felt truly heard. Although Jamal was adjusting to his new life, his past still followed him like a shadow. One day, on his way back from school, he ran into an old childhood friend, Daryl, on the corner of a convenience store. Daryl, who had also grown up in the same rundown housing complex, was now deeply involved in criminal activities. "So this is it now? You've turned into one of the good guys?" Daryl teased, with a sarcastic grin. Jamal tried to avoid confrontation, but Daryl wouldn't let it go. He knew exactly where to poke. "No matter how much these white folks try to save you, Jamal, you'll always be one of us." Those words echoed in Jamal's mind for days. Was Daryl right? Was he just fooling himself into believing he could have a different future? Amid this emotional turmoil, Thomas decided to involve Jamal more actively in church activities. He invited him to help distribute food to struggling families in the neighborhood. Initially, Jamal agreed out of politeness, but the contact with people facing struggles similar to those he knew began to transform him. One of the families they helped was a single mother with 3 small children. When Jamal handed over the bags of food, the woman looked at him with genuine gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to us," she said. That moment planted a small seed in Jamal. Maybe he could make a difference, even in small ways. But there was still a long road ahead. Jamal was torn between 2 worlds: the poverty and crime he knew so well, and the stability and opportunities the Carters offered. Meanwhile, Margaret noticed that Jamal was still struggling to trust the family fully. One night, after dinner, she sat beside him on the couch and said, "Jamal, I know what you went through wasn't easy, and I know we're asking a lot of you by expecting you to trust us. But I want you to know that, no matter what happens, you'll always have a place here." Those words struck a chord with Jamal. Despite all his resistance, he was beginning to accept that maybe this family was different. Even with his life seemingly more stable, Jamal felt the internal struggle only growing. The world he once belonged to, marked by poverty, violence, and abandonment, seemed to constantly pull him back. The new world of the Carters, on the other hand, offered opportunities he didn't know how to embrace without feeling like he was betraying who he was. One night, while everyone else was asleep, Jamal went to the kitchen. The house was utterly silent, but his mind was restless. He looked at the cabinets full of food, the shiny appliances, and thought about how surreal it all seemed. It was a life his mother and siblings had never had, and he didn't know if he deserved it. The tension escalated when Daryl reappeared, this time with a proposal. He approached Jamal outside the school, driving a car that was clearly not his. "Listen, Jamal," Daryl began with a cynical smile. "I know you're living with these church folks, but you're still one of us. I need someone I can trust for a simple job. Just take something from point A to point B. No one will know." Jamal hesitated. Everything inside him screamed to say no, but Daryl's voice was like an echo from the past, familiar and tempting. After all, what did it really mean to be one of them or one of us? "I can't," Jamal replied firmly, but his expression betrayed his doubt. "All right," Daryl said, feigning acceptance. "But remember, if you change your mind, you know where to find me." Jamal tried to hide this encounter, but Thomas noticed something was off. During a backyard basketball game, the pastor finally confronted him. "You've been distracted, Jamal. Want to talk about it?" "It's fine," Jamal replied, avoiding eye contact. Thomas didn't press further, but left him with this thought: sometimes the ghosts of the past show up to test us. Don't let them decide who you're going to be. Those words from Thomas weighed heavily on Jamal's mind. He knew the pastor was right, but the ghosts were not easy to ignore. The situation escalated when Daryl showed up again, this time in the school parking lot. He was more aggressive, insisting that Jamal should help him. "Look, you don't get it," Daryl said. "If I mess this up, I'm dead. I need you, bro." Jamal was trapped in a dilemma. Helping Daryl would jeopardize the trust the Carters had in him. But if he didn't help, he knew something bad could happen to his childhood friend. In the end, Jamal made the hardest decision. He went to Thomas and told him everything. "I've known this guy since I was a kid," Jamal said, his voice trembling. "He's in trouble, and I don't know what to do." Thomas, with a concerned look, responded calmly, "You've already done the right thing by telling us. But now we need to figure out how to handle this." Thomas went straight to the police, who were already aware of Daryl's involvement in criminal activities. When Daryl found out that Jamal had spoken to the Carters, he felt betrayed. He showed up at their house one rainy night, shouting for Jamal. "You ruined me," Daryl yelled as Thomas tried to calm him down. Jamal came down the stairs, facing his friend. "I tried to help you, but this can't go on," Jamal said, his voice firm for the first time. Daryl was taken away by the police shortly afterward, but his words lingered. "You think you're different, but deep down, you're just like me." After this episode, something shifted in Jamal. He realized that he had been trying to live with one foot in two worlds, but couldn't stay that way forever. It was time to decide who he really wanted to be. At church, during a service, Thomas asked Jamal to share his story with the congregation. It was difficult, but the young man stood up and spoke about his childhood, abandonment, and the hard choices he'd had to make. "I used to think my past defined who I was, but now I'm learning that I can be something more," Jamal said, his voice cracking. The congregation responded with applause and support, and for the first time, Jamal felt like he was beginning to accept himself. After the incident with Daryl, Jamal began to find more balance in his new life, but the process of adaptation wasn't linear. He still faced daily challenges, both internal and external, as he tried to build an identity that honored who he was without losing himself in the past. Over time, the bonds between Jamal and his adoptive siblings, Ethan and Claire, grew stronger. Ethan, who always seemed to have everything under control, began to show his more vulnerable side. During a backyard basketball game, the two had their first open conversation. "You think my life is so easy?" Ethan asked after missing a shot. Jamal laughed, surprised. "Man, you've got great parents, friends, and a life that seems perfect." Ethan shook his head, letting out a sigh. "Everyone expects me to be the best at everything. At school, on the team, even at church. Sometimes it feels like I have to be perfect all the time. It's suffocating." That moment was a turning point. Jamal realized that, although their challenges were different, Ethan carried his own burden. From then on, the two began to truly support each other, both on and off the court. Claire, on the other hand, became something of a confidant for Jamal. With her, he began exploring the world of writing, something he had never imagined himself doing. During literature lessons, Claire encouraged him to turn his experiences into stories. "You have so much to share, Jamal," she said, showing him a poem he had scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. "This is powerful. People need to hear your voice." As the bond with the Carters strengthened, rumors about Jamal's past began circulating at school. Some classmates started spreading stories about his time in the housing complex. The teasing started subtly, but quickly turned into direct insults. "Hey, Jamal, finished stealing everything in your old neighborhood before coming here?" One boy jeered in the cafeteria. Ethan tried to intervene, but Jamal insisted on handling it alone. "I don't need anyone fighting my battles," he told Ethan, masking his anger. That night, Jamal wrote an essay for a school assignment that impressed even the most skeptical teachers. In the essay, he described the weight of being judged before having the chance to explain himself. He didn't name names, but those who read it knew exactly who and what he was referring to. The essay was read aloud by the teacher during a school assembly. The impact was immediate. While some students still resisted accepting him, others began to see him in a new light. Months later, Jamal received an unexpected letter. It was from Daryl, who was serving time for drug possession and petty theft. In the letter, Daryl admitted that deep down, he had always known Jamal had the potential to be something greater. "You did what I never had the courage to do, Jamal," the letter read. "You found a way out. I hope you never come back." The words deeply affected Jamal, but they also strengthened his resolve to keep moving forward. He started visiting Daryl occasionally, bringing books and sharing what he was learning with the Carters. Even in prison, Daryl became a reminder of where Jamal didn't want to end up. With Thomas and Margaret's help, Jamal became more involved in community projects. He used basketball as a tool to reach at-risk children, organizing games at the church gym. Ethan helped as a coach, and Claire recorded the games to share on social media, drawing more participants. The project gained attention in the city, and Jamal was invited to speak about his experience at a community event. Nervous, he stepped onto the stage, but once he started talking, the words came naturally. "I used to think it was impossible to escape where I came from. But now I see that with the right people by your side, you can create a new path, not just for yourself, but for others too, despite the progress." Not everything was easy at the Carter household. During a family dinner, Ethan confronted his parents about the attention Jamal was receiving. "I know Jamal needs help, but sometimes it feels like you forget about us," Ethan said, referring to himself and Claire. Thomas replied calmly, "I know it feels like we're focusing a lot on Jamal, but that doesn't diminish how much we love you and your sister. We're trying to give him the same opportunities you've always had." The conversation brought some tension, but it also led to a deeper dialogue where everyone could express their feelings. In the end, the family came out stronger. On a cold autumn night, Jamal's life took another unexpected turn. He was at a church-organized basketball game, helping younger kids improve their skills. Ethan and Claire were in the audience, while Margaret and Thomas prepared snacks at the concession stand. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and energy, until a desperate cry broke the peace. "Fire!" Everyone turned to see thick black smoke rising on the horizon. It was coming from the area where Jamal had once lived with his mother and siblings, the old housing complex. His heart raced. He dropped the basketball immediately and ran outside, ignoring Thomas and Margaret's calls for him to wait. When he arrived, the scene was chaotic. Firefighters were battling flames that engulfed the dilapidated building. Jamal approached the barricades, the heat from the fire almost unbearable even from a distance. He recognized familiar faces, neighbors from his past, people who shared struggles similar to his own. Then he saw her, Latasha, his biological mother, sitting on the curb, coughing from the smoke and crying as she held his younger siblings. The sight shook Jamal to his core. He didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, or guilt for leaving them behind. Latasha looked at Jamal, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. "You came back," she managed to say before a violent cough interrupted her words. Jamal wanted to respond, but his throat tightened. He was about to approach her when Thomas arrived, out of breath, with Margaret close behind. They observed the scene with concern, but didn't interfere. "You don't have to do this alone," Thomas said softly, placing a firm hand on Jamal's shoulder. With Margaret's help, Jamal took Latasha and his younger siblings to a temporary shelter set up by city volunteers. While his mother rested in a chair, Jamal finally had the courage to talk to her. "Why didn't you try to change? Why didn't you ever try to leave this behind?" Latasha looked at him, her expression marked by the exhaustion of years of struggle. "I did try, Jamal, but some people just don't have the strength. I had no one, and the addiction. It won. But I'm glad you got a chance. That someone saw in you what I couldn't." Her words, though painful, brought Jamal a sense of closure. He realized he couldn't change the past or carry the guilt for his mother's choices, but he could change the future. With the Carters' help, Jamal ensured that his younger siblings were placed in a safe home. Latasha, though hesitant, agreed to participate in a rehabilitation program Margaret suggested. Jamal knew their journey was just beginning, but he felt relieved knowing they would have a second chance. When everything seemed to be settling, a new opportunity arose. Jamal's school basketball coach, impressed by his skill, recommended him for an advanced training program in another city. It was a unique chance that could open doors to a professional career in the sport. But accepting the offer would mean distancing himself from the Carter family, the community project, and everything he had built so far. Jamal felt torn. The night before the decision, he spoke with Thomas. "I don't know what to do. If I go, it feels like I'm abandoning everything again." Thomas smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jamal, sometimes moving forward isn't abandoning. It's honoring what you've built. You'll always have a home with us, no matter where you are." The next day, Jamal made his decision. He accepted the program but insisted on a condition: that he could return periodically to continue working on the community project that meant so much to him. The farewell was emotional. Ethan and Claire threw him a surprise party, and Margaret cooked his favorite dish. When it was time to leave, Thomas hugged him tightly and said, "Remember, who you are today is the result of all the tough choices you've made. Keep making good ones, and the rest will follow." As Jamal rode the bus to his new destination, he looked out the window with a mix of nervousness and excitement. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own story. The move to the training program in another city was the ultimate test for Jamal. He arrived in a new environment, surrounded by equally talented and determined young athletes, each carrying dreams as big as his own. The competitiveness was intense, and the pressure to stand out was palpable from day one. The first practices were grueling. Jamal realized that while he was skilled, he still had much to learn. More than the physical effort, what challenged him was the mindset. He needed to convince himself that he belonged there. The echoes of his past, the comments from Daryl, the judgmental stares, the internal doubts still lingered. However, something inside him had changed. He wasn't alone anymore. The memories of the Carter family, the moments at the church, and the smiles of the children in the community project strengthened him. When exhaustion felt overwhelming, he thought of Ethan shouting instructions on the court, Claire encouraging him to share his story, and Thomas reminding him that the past didn't define the future. Even from afar, Jamal made sure to stay in touch with the Carters. He called them weekly, sharing his challenges and victories. Margaret, ever optimistic, often said, "We're all rooting for you, Jamal. But remember, no matter what happens, you're already a winner." Conversations with Claire became a particular source of comfort. She encouraged him to keep writing about his experiences, something he began doing regularly. Over time, writing became a way for him to organize his thoughts and process his emotions. Ethan also stayed in touch, though in a more practical way. He sent videos of basketball techniques, commented on Jamal's games, and even offered advice on handling intense practices. Despite the distance, their bond seemed stronger than ever. After months of dedication, Jamal was selected to represent his team in a state tournament. It was a golden opportunity, not just to prove his skills, but also to catch the attention of college scouts. On the day of the tournament, the court was packed, and the lights reflected the sweat and tension on the players' faces. Jamal was nervous but felt prepared. He knew everything he had endured had shaped him for this moment. During the game, he gave it his all. He made crucial baskets, worked as part of the team, and, in the final minute, pulled off a spectacular play that secured his team's victory. The crowd erupted in celebration, and Jamal received a standing ovation. Among the spectators was a scout from one of the country's top universities. After the game, he approached Jamal and said, "You've got talent, kid. I want you to play for us." It was a moment of euphoria, but also one of reflection. Jamal knew this opportunity was rare, but he also knew it came with sacrifices. Before deciding on the offer, Jamal returned to Newark. He wanted to visit the Carters and check on his mother and siblings. When he arrived in his old neighborhood, he found a transformed scene. The community project he had started with the Carters had expanded, involving more volunteers and supporting dozens of families. Jamal was welcomed as a hero by the children he used to play basketball with, now a little older, but still full of admiration for him. Visiting his mother, he noticed subtle changes. Latasha, now months into recovery, was sober and caring for her children with greater attention. She hugged Jamal tightly and said, "I'm sorry, Jamal, but I'm trying to be better for you." For all of us, back at the Carters' house, the reception was warm and joyful. Margaret prepared a special dinner, and Thomas gathered everyone in the living room to hear Jamal's stories. He shared his experience at the tournament, the scouts' offer, and the opportunity to study and play at the university. "So, what are you going to do?" Ethan asked excitedly. Jamal took a deep breath. "I'm going to accept, but I'm coming back whenever I can. This place, you, are my foundation." Jamal began his new journey at the university with renewed determination. He joined the basketball team as a freshman, but quickly stood out for his discipline and skill. However, life on campus was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Surrounded by students from diverse backgrounds and experiences, Jamal found himself confronting old insecurities and reaffirming who he wanted to be. The first few months were grueling. Jamal juggled intense practices with a heavy course load. He knew he couldn't afford to make mistakes on or off the court. But over time, the emotional isolation began to weigh on him. The competitiveness of the environment and the constant need to prove himself made him question if he was on the right path. One particularly difficult night, Jamal received a letter from Claire. Unlike the quick calls and video messages she usually sent, the letter was long and heartfelt. "Jamal, we all miss you. The house isn't the same without your jokes and your laughter, but I know you're exactly where you're meant to be. I've always believed in you, and seeing what you're building makes me proud every day. Don't forget you don't have to carry everything alone. We're here for you always." The letter brought Jamal unexpected relief. He realized that, even from afar, he wasn't alone. His ties to the Carters and his own history were his strength, and he decided to use them as fuel to keep moving forward. Inspired by Claire's words and his family's ongoing support, Jamal began to get involved in programs at the university. He joined a mentorship initiative to help other students from disadvantaged communities adjust to college life. His impact was immediate. Many of the students he mentored saw him as a role model. Jamal shared his story openly, talking about the hardships of growing up in a hostile environment, but also about the people who believed in him and helped him forge a better future. "I used to think my life was defined by where I came from," he told an audience at a university event. "But I've learned that what truly matters is where we choose to go." By the end of his first year, Jamal had the chance to participate in one of the most important games of the college basketball championship. The match would be nationally televised, with scouts from professional leagues watching closely. On game day, the arena was packed and the energy was electric. Jamal felt the pressure but reminded himself of all he had overcome to get there. The game was intense, with both teams neck and neck. In the final quarter, with the score tied, Jamal found the ball in his hands for the last play. The crowd roared, and he could feel the weight of the moment. As he prepared to make his move, he remembered Thomas's words, "Who you are today is the result of all the tough choices you've made." With that thought, he focused, made a perfect move, and scored the winning basket. The arena erupted in celebration, and Jamal's teammates hoisted him onto their shoulders. The victory brought immediate recognition. Jamal was featured in sports news articles and received invitations to meet with professional scouts. Despite the attention, he remained humble and grounded. During the summer break, Jamal returned home to Newark. He visited the Carters and the community project, which had grown even more successful. Ethan and Claire were continuing their own paths, Ethan as a high school basketball coach, and Claire as a writer and journalist covering stories of resilience and hope. Jamal also visited Latasha, who was still committed to her recovery. Their relationship was still a work in progress, but every small step felt like a victory. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Jamal told her one afternoon. Latasha's eyes filled with tears. "And I'm proud of you, Jamal. More than you'll ever know." With the end of the college season, Jamal faced a major decision. He received an offer to enter the NBA draft, a dream for many but achievable by few. At the same time, he was invited to expand the community projects he had started with the Carters, focusing on education and youth programs. The decision seemed impossible: follow the bright lights of professional basketball or fully dedicate himself to making a social impact. "Can't I do both?" Jamal asked Thomas during a phone call. Thomas replied with wisdom, "Sometimes we think we have to choose between our dreams and our purpose. But if we look closely, we can often find a way to balance the two." Jamal took those words to heart. He decided to enter the draft, but made a commitment to continue supporting the community initiatives during his off-season. On the night of the NBA draft, Jamal sat anxiously surrounded by the people who mattered most: Thomas, Margaret, Ethan, Claire, and even Latasha. When his name was called as a pick for a professional team, the room erupted in cheers and hugs. During his first press conference as a professional player, Jamal spoke with sincerity. "I'm just the result of the people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And now it's my turn to believe in others." Jamal's debut in the NBA was grand, with the stands filled and millions watching on television. Yet, the most important presence for Jamal was the Carters and Latasha, sitting in a private box to cheer him on. However, the game began with challenges. Jamal missed easy passes and hesitated in moves he usually executed flawlessly. At halftime, he checked his phone in the locker room and saw a message from Claire: "Remember who you are. This is just another court. Go out there and do what you do best." Those words reignited something in Jamal. He stepped onto the court in the second half with renewed confidence, making crucial plays and leading his team to a close victory with a buzzer-beating shot. The buzzer-beating victory in Jamal's NBA debut cemented his status as not just a talented player, but a rising star. The media was abuzz with his name, and the video of his game-winning shot went viral. Yet, Jamal remained grounded, reflecting on how far he had come. During the post-game press conference, when asked how he handled the pressure, Jamal's response was honest and heartfelt. "I carry the people who got me here. My family, my friends, even the tough times I've been through, they're all part of who I am. That's what keeps me steady, no matter how loud the crowd gets." As his career in the NBA blossomed, Jamal kept his promise to balance his professional success with his commitment to the community. Using his newfound platform, he expanded the foundation he had started with the Carters, focusing on education, sports, and mental health programs for underprivileged youth. The foundation grew rapidly, offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and athletic events in cities across the United States. Jamal didn't just fund the programs, he actively participated, mentoring young athletes, sharing his story, and showing them what was possible. His mother, Latasha, became one of the foundation's most passionate volunteers. She helped organize support groups for mothers battling addiction, offering hope and guidance drawn from her own journey. Although their relationship was still rebuilding, their mutual effort to help others strengthened their bond. "Your belief in me gave me the courage to try," Latasha told Jamal one day. "Now, I want to give that to others. One of the foundation's most ambitious projects was the construction of a state-of-the-art sports and community center in Newark. The center, built on the site of Jamal's old housing complex, was named the Jamal Carter Sports and Leadership Center in honor of his journey and his efforts to uplift others. At the grand opening, Jamal stood before a crowd of hundreds, including his family, old neighbors, and young kids eager to play on the brand new courts. Thomas was among the speakers, and when he took the stage, he looked at Jamal with deep pride. Jamal taught us that even the toughest soil can grow the most beautiful flowers. This center is proof that when we invest in people, we create something that lasts. When it was Jamal's turn to speak, he addressed the crowd with emotion. This center isn't just about basketball. It's about opportunity, about giving kids a chance to dream bigger than their circumstances. It's proof that no matter where you start, your story can change. The audience erupted in applause, and Jamal scanned the crowd, spotting Margaret, Ethan, Claire, and Latasha smiling back at him. For the first time, he truly felt like he had fulfilled a promise to himself and his community. Over the following years, Jamal continued to build his legacy, both on and off the court. He became an NBA All-Star, known not only for his skills, but also for his leadership and humility. His foundation expanded internationally, creating programs in underprivileged communities around the world. Ethan, now a high school basketball coach, often invited Jamal to speak to his players, sharing lessons about resilience and teamwork. Claire, a successful journalist, wrote a feature about Jamal's journey, calling it a testament to the power of second chances and unconditional love. Jamal's book, Where I Came From, Where I'm Going, became a bestseller, inspiring countless readers. In it, he shared his struggles, triumphs, and the people who shaped him. My story isn't about basketball, he wrote. It's about people, about the power of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. One quiet Sunday, Jamal returned to the Carter's house for a family dinner. Margaret was in the kitchen baking her famous chocolate cake. Thomas was reading on the porch, and Ethan and Claire were laughing in the backyard. Jamal sat with them, feeling a deep sense of peace. You know you're the reason for all of this, right? Jamal said, breaking the silence. Ethan smirked. We know. But you did your part too, man. Everyone laughed, and Jamal smiled, realizing that this home, with all its love and challenges, was his anchor. Years later, Jamal found himself back in Newark for a ceremony dedicating the now thriving community center's expansion. The event drew national attention, with leaders, athletes, and young kids attending to celebrate what the center had accomplished. As Jamal took the stage, he reflected on his journey from the chaotic apartment in Block D to the quiet sanctuary of the Carter's home, from struggling to find his place to becoming a leader and mentor. This center is proof that no one is a lost cause, Jamal said, his voice steady. It's proof that with love, support, and opportunity, we can all write a new story. Looking out at the crowd, he spotted familiar faces. Thomas, Margaret, Ethan, Claire, and Latasha, each representing a chapter of his life. Nearby, children ran across the court, laughing and playing a vision of hope and the future. For a moment, Jamal stood quietly, taking it all in. He knew his story wasn't finished, but for now, he was exactly where he needed to be.